Many times we laugh and scoff at things out of ignorance. In our travels along the historical paths on For the People, we have brought some information to you that might have seemed unbelievable or maybe even ridiculous. For example, when Cornell University Egyptologist Dr. Yosef Ben-Jachin told us that there are more black Jews than white Jews and that the first Jews were black, many of us probably called him a quack. Well, several days ago, ABC Evening News aired a segment on the Jews of Ethiopia. These black Jews, who until recently were denied entry into Israel, are now being allowed to return to their ancient homeland. In the report that had to be cleared by the Israeli government, the reporter said that the tradition of these Ethiopian Jews goes back some 2,700 years. Many times we laugh in ignorance. This evening on For the People, we begin a series on an historical conference designed to dispel lies and set the record straight on many other historical fronts.
Many times we are told that civilization started from Africa. And do you believe civilization started from Africa?
Well, I personally believe that there has been a lot of civilization that took place in Africa. Saying whether it really began in Africa might be a little questionable, but I still want to believe, yeah, it did start in Africa.
Questionable?
Yes, because I don't know about, there's been a lot of civilizations throughout history.
Yeah.
Yeah, in and out of continental Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Time-wise, I can't say I know of all civilization and the time they occurred, but Africa has civilization that date back to really, really far back in time.
Okay. Now, I'm saying that civilization started in Africa.
Oh, okay.
And civilization started on the Nile Valley.
Uh-huh.
The Nile Valley, the River Nile comes from all the way Uganda, and it goes all the way to the Mediterranean Sea.
Yes.
And it passes through Egypt. And so the Egyptians, they liked to worship the River Nile. And also along the River Nile, they developed agriculture. Agriculture developed from different parts of the world. We have agriculture developing in Asia. We had agriculture in River Ganges, which is the longest river in India.
Mm-hmm.
We had agriculture in Yellow River, which is the largest river in China. We had the development of agriculture in River Euphrates. River Euphrates is found in Iraq. And also we had agriculture in Nile River, with which we saw the establishment of hieroglyphics, which is one of the most earliest forms of writing.
Yes.
Yes. So in this video, we are going to discuss how this Nile Valley civilization is impacting your life, or rather impacted also the lives of our ancestors, black people, and why I still believe that Egypt, the original inhabitants are not the Arabs.
Of course.
And I believe it was the black people over there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here is something about the Nile Valley civilization. According to Google, the Nile Valley civilization is a group of cultures that developed along the Nile River, from its source in Uganda and Ethiopia to its mouth in the Mediterranean Sea. These civilizations are considered some of the oldest in human history, along with those in the Tigris and the Euphrates, Indus, Yangtze, and the Yangtze rivers and valley. Yangtze, I think, is a Chinese name.
Yes.
And also we have that the Nile Valley civilization flourished for a number of reasons. The first one is annual flooding. The Nile annual flooding from July to November deposited nutrient-rich silt on the land, creating ideal conditions for growing crops. Also, we have protection from enemies and diseases.
Mm-hmm.
The seas to the north and east and the desert to the west provided natural protection from enemies and diseases. So our black ancestors were really much accommodated with this. Also, the Nile Valley supported Africans with easy transportation. The Nile waters provided an easy route for trade between regions up and down the river. Some other characterizations of the Nile Valley include polytheistic religion. The ancient blacks in Egypt practiced a complex system of polytheistic beliefs and rituals, where we didn't have one god, but we had gods.
Many gods.
Gods for rainfall, gods for fertility,
Yes.
good produce, and such. And also we had the god of war.
Yeah.
The black Egyptians kept writing records using a system of writing which they used symbols, animal symbols, to denote a certain information. So we can clearly say that the black people in Egypt brought about the first civilization. Egyptian rulers used the idea of divine kingship and constructed monumental architecture. The Egyptians developed trade networks along the Nile in the Red Sea and in the Near East. The term Nile Valley is sometimes used in Afrocentrism or Pan-Africanism, which I agree. Now, there's a black professor who has an in-depth analysis of what really happened along the Nile Valley, you know?
Yes.
I want us to listen to this professor, get to understand what he's got to say, and then we shall give you our thoughts by the end of the video, where we shall do what, brother?
We shall have an analysis and give our opinions on the same.
Yeah, the analysis will be deep and critical.
Of course.
See you in the...
The conference, which was sponsored by the Bennu Study Group of Atlanta, Georgia, featured some of the most highly respected scholars in the field of African history. One of those scholars was Dr. Naim Akbar, a clinical psychologist in the Department of Psychology and Black Studies at Florida State University. Dr. Akbar is a board member of the National Black Child Development Institute. He is also a board member of the Health Brain Trust of the Congressional Black Caucus. His latest book is entitled Chains and Images of Psychological Slavery. Dr. Akbar's topic this evening is the study of the mind in Egyptian history.
First of all, why are we here? Answer, we are here to set the record straight. Egyptology is not a new pursuit. Since the peak of Kemetic civilization, each generation of scholars have devoted themselves to various aspects of understanding what went on in Egypt. It has been a long-standing pursuit to try to understand what clearly represents a real peak of human evolution and of human development. So the fact that we are here to talk about ancient Kemet is by no means anything innovative. It by no means anything new. The thing that makes this gathering significant is that we are here to affirm for all who may wonder that the people who were responsible for the ascension of that society were people who looked like us. Now let's be very clear that their power was not because they were black. Their power transcended their blackness. But because there have been those imposters who have chosen to exclude the black presence, it's necessary for us to affirm the obvious, and that is that in Africa, people are African people. And therefore, the wisdom of Africa is clearly the wisdom of African people, black people. So we are not here to carry around a black flag. We are not here to affirm a counter-racist perspective. We are here simply to affirm and assert what any fool should have known anyway, and that is that Egypt, Kemet, is the history of ourselves. So anyone who is not a part of this deprives him or herself of an historical moment. Anyone who believes that somehow what we are doing here in trying to redevelop the Afrocentric perspective is not something significant, certainly is sacrificing a significant experience for themselves. Let's proceed. Let's understand that somehow the knowledge of trying to redevelop the way that the people of ancient Kemet dealt with their reality is no more than an effort to try to practice redemption. What is redemption? Redemption is restoration, resurrection, the resumption of what was supposed to be, the reestablishment of perfection. Knowledge is what breeds and builds perfection. And Dr. George G.M. James said many years ago that by beginning to assert the source of the higher knowledge of humanity and of the universe itself becomes for African people a process of redemption. I like to quote him. He says, "This proposition, that is, that Greeks were not the authors of Greek philosophy, but the black people of North Africa, the Egyptians were, will become a philosophy of redemption to all black people when they accept it as a belief and live up to it." I'd like to underscore the latter part of that. A lot of us accept it as a belief, but few of us are willing to live up to it because these are demanding standards. But once we are willing to do both those things, then we have the real standards for redemption. Our philosophy of redemption, he says, is a psychological process involving a change in behaviors. It really signifies, Dr. James says, a mental emancipation in which the black people will be liberated from the chain of traditional falsehood, which for centuries has incarcerated them in the prison of inferiority complex and world humiliation and insult. So the point of it is that by beginning to understand these things, we are engaging in a redemptive process. Now, I decided that I wanted to look at the ancient Egyptian, ancient Kemetic conception of the study of the mind, the science of the mind. Little did I know that I was getting into very, very deep water. Not only couldn't I possibly deal with that in an hour or a 20-page paper, I could not deal with it in 20 years or several volumes. Because we will find in just a few minutes that much of whatever existed in terms of the knowledge of ancient Kemet was in fact about the study of the mind. To begin, I want to simply, very briefly, some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with some of the things that Wade Nobles and Joseph Baldwin and Saeed Khatib and others of us have been doing in the whole area of African psychology. And so you are aware of some of the critiques that we've presented of so-called traditional Western psychology. But I think in order to more effectively understand the relevance of the Kemetic notions of the mind, it's important to understand the limited notions of the mind which have emerged out of Western thought, out of the Judeo-Christian European conception of the human being and the human functioning. We must understand, first of all, that Western development is in fact deficient. It is deficient because the technology has far outstripped the human knowledge. We have vehicles and vessels of technological expression which far exceed the human development. We have more human problems of a basic nature in this society than societies with much less concept of technology ever had. We have to learn to go how to do basic things like love and make love and have families and raise families and interact with other human beings in a meaningful way. We have to go back and take classes in learning that, which apes do very well. Despite the fact that we have video recorders and we have astronauts going to the moon and all these other great things, despite all those technological advances, we are humanly retarded. And I would submit to you that a reason for that is because of the limited conception of the human being, which is developed in Western psychology and in Western thinking. If we take the word psychology itself, which the Westerners have distorted and reduced to mean the scientific study of human behavior, we find the first flaw of ignorance. The word itself, psyche, which has a Greek origin, which had an African origin, is usually equated with the Greek goddess Psyche, meaning soul. According to Massey in the Book of the Beginnings, he says that the word psyche is actually derived from the Egyptian, in which Ka, K-H-E, is the soul, and Su is she. Hence the feminine nature of the Greek Suki or Psyche. Without the P, the word Saku in Egyptian means the understanding, the illuminator, the eye and the soul of being, that which it inspires. The point of it is not only is the study of the human mind passed down to us in its modern context out of Greece, who stole it from Africa, but even the word which is used for the pursuit of that study is based upon its African origin. But of course, no one likes to admit that reality. Now, we then must understand that because of the distortion in the definition of having gone from the study of what was the soul to being the study of behavior, we find a whole array of distortions which have followed from that, which serves as the basis for the problems that we have. Very briefly, and I don't want to spend most of my time on this, I just want to run through a brief of these descriptions of Western psychology. First of all, man is viewed as an object, and emphasis is placed upon objective methods for studying him. Meaning, of course, that it's assumed that all knowledge is external. Everything comes from the outside, including salvation. That the human being is no more than a tabula rasa that's imprinted upon by things in the environment. And the only way you can understand man is by objectively standing out and dealing with man as if he's a rat. In Western psychology, it is no longer legitimate to even ask a man what he thinks, because that's considered to be unscientific, unobjective, and therefore does not qualify to be put into the pursuit of scientific pursuits. The idea is that somehow objectivity is the virtue of science, and therefore to have anything which suggests that the person can have an intuitive, introspective, subjective awareness of himself is a recognition and a prostitution, if you will, of what has come to be known science. Secondly, quantification is the only accepted measure of reality. If you can't count it, it ain't real. The idea that anything that can't be put on a scale, a measure, a ruler, a scale of some sort to weigh it or measure it, it isn't real. So there's no such thing as intelligence if you can't put numbers on it. There's no such thing as happiness if you can't put numbers on it. You can't even be crazy unless you get a score above 70 on MMPI. So everything has to be quantified in order to be real. Third, the material world is viewed as essential, and the essence of man is assumed to be material. That means that body is being. That somehow what you are physiologically defines what you are as a human being. It defines the equation between a rat, a monkey, a roach, and a person. The idea being is that since they're all bodies, since they're all material, then they're all the same thing. So the study of a rat tells you about the study of a human being, because of the equation. Not only that, there's no need, of course, to pursue anything beyond the visible body. Anything before or after that could not be considered as relevant data. Number 4, there is no concept of a superior power or purpose of man. Therefore, man is sort of serendipitously here. He just growed, as Totsi said. He has no concept, he has no direction, he is a part of no order. There is nothing to look to man to expect of him because he pursues no particular track. Western psychology now, these are the lies we are talking about. Number 5, the observable activities of a person are the critical dimensions of his being. That's the behavior thing again. What you see is what you get. Number 6, concepts such as soul, spirit, revelations, or any non-observable phenomena is viewed as superstition, delusion, or has no relevance to the understanding of man. 7, life and consciousness are identical with physical processes, meaning that brain is equivalent to mind. We can then tell you the concept of your mind by understanding the functioning of your brain. So the pursuit of knowledge of the mind is no more than pursuit of knowledge of the brain. If we can alter it chemically, we can change your mind. And your mind has nothing to do with the alteration of your chemistry, because your mind is a servant of the chemistry, according to them. Man's individuality is paramount. and there is no transpersonal awareness, meaning that there is no such thing in Western psychology as a group or a collective mind. The whole idea of Africanity, the whole idea of African people, the whole idea of an ethos, the whole idea of a mentality that ties people together, that transcends their individuality, is absolutely unheard of and unaccepted in Western psychology. You are an individual, isolated being, and that's the extent of it. Number 9, man is a product of biological determinants, personal experiences, and chance. Self-explanatory. There's no correct order for man's development. He survives against odds by adaptation to his environment. We've talked about that. Morality and values have no meaning outside of personal experience. Therefore, if there's no order, then you don't expect people to do anything. Therefore, they can do anything as they do in this society. If you assume that there's no particular project, no particular direction, no particular sense to the nonsense, then morality is meaningless. So therefore, in Western psychology, all they do is observe it, feed it back, and often feed it, and therefore begin to create the greatest perverts the world has ever known here in Western society. The child molesters, all the rest of the goody things that has been created by this concept that thinking that morality is the purview of the church and not the purview of effective human development. Number 12, and most devastating of all, death of the body is death of the mind, and one need not attend to life before or after the body. Now, this is Western psychology, and in the process of making these conclusions, of locking us in to this limited time phase of 2 years or 2 months or 70 years or 60 years or 65 years, from the moment of birth in this plane to death in this plane, to define the totality of human consciousness as belonging there. They have blocked our expansion to reach beyond time and throughout the whole universe. But psychology is narrow-minded. That's why you've got narrow, limited, tiny, itsy-bitsy people who have not begun to grasp their potential in this society. That's Western psychology. Let's move on. 2 things account for this that I'd just like to mention briefly, because this is an entirely different discussion. Sexism and racism. By dividing the world up into 2 phases, mind and body and all the other dualisms, male and female, and making the 2 absolutely separate from each other, they have created an illusion that any characteristic that's associated with female therefore has no place in understanding the functioning of real mind. The concept of psyche or soul having a historical connection with femininity, which of course has a comedic root too, presumes then that soul stuff is inferior stuff. So therefore, soul has no place in the scientific, powerful, masculine tradition of Western science. So that fear of femininity, that fear of spirituality, that fear of anything that they have put into the realm of the feminine is eliminated. And then to add on top of that, there is the blatant racism. Dr. Diop has said in his comments, he says, the common denominator which characterizes the mindset of Egyptologists, as repeated in their various theses about ancient Africa, is their seeming desperate necessity and unrelentless attempt to refute ancient Africa's blackness. It was scary to accept the fact that black people built what they had to emulate. It's painful for them to internalize the concept that their society, their civilization is rooted in something that emanated out of the minds of the people who they chose to define as being inferior. So the fear of women and the fear of African people combined together to create this overwhelming fear which made them run away from the other sides of themselves. And in running away from the other sides of themselves, they created this prostituted and prevaricated so-called science which excludes the most significant components. The fundamental error of dividing man up in this dichotomous way and putting him into mind, into body, and making that which is mind and spirit either become feminine or superstitious or mystical or spiritual, which of course women and black people have a lot of. So they talk about black magic and mysticism and all that spiritual stuff among African people, but they do it in a derogatory and a degrading sense. The idea is that spirituality is inferior to science. And in order to speak profoundly, one must speak scientifically, because that's that weak stuff. But it's very significant that they gave what they could not handle to those who they could not accept. And they gave that which they could not understand to those who gave them all that they have. And in the process of doing so, they divided their own potential for development. That's why we need to redeem them and redeem ourselves before they kill us. Let's go on. The psychology of ancient Kemet. No way, no way to make it clear. Let me try one aspect of it in the time that we have available and see what we can do. The wisdom of ancient Kemet is like a vast tapestry of amazing complexity, with colors and dimensionality covering the full range of man's vision and envisioning. Each thread of the tapestry has been carefully woven such that every thread is defined by every other. And the tapestry holds together in its wholeness only because every thread is present. No thread can be unraveled meaningfully without destroying the tapestry. Such is the task which faces anyone who seeks to explore any thread of the knowledge of ancient Egypt. As Schwaller de Lubis has observed, excavations and philological studies supply the Egyptologists with abundant material for a knowledge of the life, beliefs, and theology of ancient Egypt. An encyclopedic amount of work is available to researchers. Nevertheless, he says, pharaonic Egypt remains unknown in terms of its true science, its contingent psycho-spiritual knowledge, and its philosophical mentality. In short, because of the complexity of the wisdom of ancient Egypt, it's very difficult to go in and say, this is the psychology, this is the physics, this is the chemistry, this is the mathematics, and make divisions which were artificial to begin with, because they all existed in a whole total perspective that one fed and grew upon the other, and you can never separate them from the other. There was no such thing as sacred versus secular. There was no such thing as the life of this world and the life of the other world. There was no such thing as the religious versus the political life. It was all tied intimately and inextricably together. So to even engage in this process becomes an engagement in doing something that actually does not do justice to the vastness of the knowledge which existed in that time. So we are going to try to be rational and fragmented to deal with things that are supra-rational and holistic. Let us be clear, though. Even though psychology explicitly in ancient Egypt does not exist, it is important to realize that man was viewed as the fundamental metaphor for all higher truth. The gods, the netters, I don't want to get into this, but netters is a better word, because those who have attempted to understand ancient Kemet speak of them as having a pantheon. Pantheon is a Greek concept. They were the ones who made the principles of nature that they had learned from the Kemetic people into separate gods and worshiped them as separate deities, whereas the concept of netters does not mean gods, it means principles that were personified and symbolized because they transcended the scientific objective definitions that somehow could fit into a narrow perspective, so they were giving a mythical appearance to try to describe the intricacies of nature working above and beyond all that was there. So the idea of a pantheon is a European prostitution, prevarication. It does not represent what they got from their teachers. Naughty, naughty students. So clearly, the understanding of man was viewed as paramount in the science, the wisdom, and the theology of ancient Egypt. The study of religion and science, mathematics, psychology, and government was the study of man. You know, it is not accidental, even though, given the kind of limited understanding we have of these things, we've come to think of things like astrology and alchemy and numerology as being superstition. It simply represented that those people understood that you could not talk about mathematics without talking about man. Therefore, numerology talked about the relationship between symbolic quantification and human evolution. Alchemy talked about the connection between the transformation of processes and minerals in nature with the transformative potential in the human psyche. So alchemy transcends chemistry. It is not less than, it is greater than. Of course, when the materialist Europeans got a hold to it, they wanted to begin to use it to make gold out of lead and all that other kind of wild stuff. But that again represents naughty students who didn't learn well, rather than the meaning of the science itself, astrology. As Dr. Van Sertima pointed out last night in his presentation, the study of the stars, astronomy, was talking about the relationship between human process and celestial process, recognizing a connection between the two and the inseparability of the two, understanding that human development and astral development were all allied and related, and therefore the evolution of mind was related to the evolution of the heavens, and the movement and the timing and the consistency of nature was integral to understanding the development of mind. So alchemy, astrology, numerology, we must rediscover in their certain form. And I'm not talking about Linda Goodman stuff too. You are compatible with a Cancer because she has good sex appeal in her crab-like orientation. I'm talking about the real stuff. I'm talking about the stuff that they stole that from and reduced to nothingness. So we now throw out the most essential part of our wisdom, because we've lost the connectedness that belongs to our own science.
I don't know why so many of our black scholars, most of them are Muslims. Have you discovered that?
Yeah.
Malcolm X.
Yeah, he converted.
Elijah Muhammad.
Yes, he converted.
Khalid Muhammad.
Yes.
We have this lady. I did a video about her. I just forgot her name, you know.
Louis Farrakhan.
Louis Farrakhan.
He's also...
What's up? But regardless, they have a good history they share with us.
Yeah.
And
it's our blackness that is the common denominator.
Yeah. And we are so much proud of that.
Of course.
So let's have a talk about Egypt, the Nile Valley, and the civilization. Now, here is something I want us to see about the history of the Nile civilization to the black people of America and Africa, you know?
Yeah.
The Nile Valley is often referred to as the lifeblood of ancient Egypt.
Yes.
It has played a critical role in shaping one of the most influential civilizations in human history. That's how impactful the Nile Valley has been, you know?
Yes.
This civilization, the ancient Egyptian civilization, flourished along the riverbanks, and its legacy continues to resonate in Africa and deeply with black people, you know?
Yes.
The black diaspora, which is including also the black Americans. Are we together, brother?
Yes.
The following, the video we've just watched was just a glimpse of what the Nile civilization and how it has been impactful to the establishment of the black community. In some way, we've borrowed some of their ways of living. Some of their geniuses are still found within our African people. You did a video about the inventions black people have done, right?
Yes.
What do you have to say about the correlation between ancient Egypt and modern day black people?
Egypt goes a long way to tell us about how much inventive and innovative black people have been since the beginning of time. And however, as we had seen in my video that we did, most of it is masked, is hidden, is deliberately not shown.
Yeah.
In fact, deliberately hidden away from us.
Yeah.
Yeah, so talking about the Nile Valley civilization, really is just part and parcel of black excellence.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, you know, one thing I like about, it is believed that Moses was black. Do you believe Moses was black?
I often try to think in the lines of where were these particularly where were these actions taking place?
They were taking
geographically
in okay, the modern day Israel is somehow closer, or rather it's an extension of the ancient Israel, because the ancient Israel took part of Palestine,
yes,
which we know today. And these biblical characters were coming from that part of Palestine and Israel. And so they came to Africa. They even had a king here in Africa who was Jew. Joseph was a Jew.
Yeah.
And he came to Africa.
Yes.
You know? They came to Africa and they survived from that hunger, because there was a very huge starvation and famine in their country. It is in Africa where they found the technology to store food, the technology of agriculture, the technology of housing. We had gold, we had everything. Africa was like a storehouse, it was like a powerhouse, it was like a sanctuary. And all this is a contribution of the Nile Valley. The Nile Valley, as we've seen from the video, is a place of fertility.
Oh, of course.
You would find that the soils which have been taken from the highlands of Ethiopia, you know, there's a particular kind of soil called the silt.
The silt, yes.
You know the silt?
Yeah, I do.
It's highly fertile. It's always on the top layer. Now, when the river comes, it washes away from the highlands of Ethiopia. And then
it deposits into the lowlands of the Nile Valley.
Yeah. So these places were very fertile. No wonder they had the first civilization, you know?
Yeah.
And no wonder they provided food for those starving community.
Yeah.
You know? Even I believe creating the pyramid was such a huge task that needed a lot of water in order to make it as it is, because those things are gigantic.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. Now, as I was continuing with this, my research, and I want us to continue is this, the birth of the Nile civilization, and what is the connection between us black people and the Nile civilization. The Nile River, which flows through northeastern Africa, stretches about 4,135 miles. Did you know that? That's close to 6,300 kilometers.
Making it the longest river
in the world?
In the world, yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Making it the longest river in the world, it's true. Its seasonal flooding and fertile soil allowed early human societies to thrive in what otherwise would have been a desert region.
Yeah.
The Egyptians, and indeed many African civilizations, depended on the annual inundation of the Nile, which deposited rich silt onto the land, providing the fertile soil necessary for agriculture. You can't have civilization if you don't have food.
No way.
And food comes from agriculture.
Yes.
The river, which is central to the lives of ancient Egyptians, supported a civilization that emerged around 3100 BCE. The history of Egypt can be divided into several periods, with the early dynastic period, which is 3100 BCE to 2686 BCE, marking the unification of the Upper and Lower Egypt under the first pharaoh, Pharaoh Narmer, also known as Menes.
No.
The first pharaoh was Menes. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
He was black.
Okay.
This unification set the stage for the construction of a sophisticated society with centralized government, organized religion, monumental architecture, and advanced technology of mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. The people of the Nile were predominantly of African descent, and their civilization was one of the earliest to develop advanced writing systems, including hieroglyphics, which recorded their history, spiritual beliefs, and administrative functions. The black Egyptians, with their complex culture and philosophy and a way of life, had set a precedent for later African civilizations. So they set the stage, and as I told you, there is like making the pyramid, the science is very complex. The geometry is very complex. There's no way a white person to come to Africa and create a pyramid and they leave their own place. If there's a place they would want it to be, it would have been their place.
Yes, definitely.
Why Africa?
Because it was an African civilization that gave birth to those complex structures.
Yes. And this history is very interesting. Now let's look at the golden age of ancient Egypt. Egypt reached its zenith during the Old Kingdom, a period famously known for the construction of the Great Pyramids of Giza. So these pyramids were created during a period called the period of zenith. These pyramids and the monumental statues of the pharaohs served as testaments to the genius of African architectural and engineering prowess. The pyramids were not just tombs, but were also considered gateways to the afterlife, representing the deep spiritual connection to the Egyptians had with their gods, especially the god Ra, the sun god he was believed to travel the sky on the Nile. The Middle Kingdom, which happened between 2055 BCE to 1650 BCE, followed a period of disunity and marked a resurgence in Egypt's power, prosperity, and artistic achievements. The Egyptian state was reorganized and more emphasis was placed on the welfare of its people, with advances in medicine, literature, and diplomacy. The Middle Kingdom, as I stated before, is also, was also saw the development of new trade routes connecting Egypt to the broader African continent, particularly to Nubia to the south, where many Egyptian royal families had origins. So, the Nubians are very, very black.
Yes.
They are the Sudanese.
The Sudanese and South Sudanese.
And according to this research, many people of the royal family in the Pharaoh's pyramid were having, most of them were having Nubian origins. Those people are very dark,
Yes.
Did you watch the movie about Cleopatra, the one on Netflix?
Yeah.
They showed her to be black, contrary to the white. It took the internet by a storm.
Yeah.
Whites were so mad about it.
I saw the backlash and they were so angry.
Yeah. It was so sad, man. No, not sad, but enlightening. It was sad to them, but enlightening to us.
Yes.
So some of these royal families had origins with the Nubians, where many Egyptian royal families had origins, which is Nubia. Sorry for repeating that. So these further cemented the deep cultural and genetic ties between Egypt and sub-Saharan Africa. So the third kingdom was the New Kingdom, which happened between 5050 BCE to 1077 BCE. It is perhaps the most famous era of Egypt's history, often referred to as the Empire Age, due to Egypt's territorial expansion and the flourishing of its wealth and influence. This period saw the reign of some of Egypt's most iconic pharaohs, including Thutmose III, Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun. Do you know Pharaoh Tutankhamun?
No.
He is the most recently discovered pharaoh. His mummy was the most recently discovered. I think he's the only pharaoh whose mummies had been found.
Okay.
His name is Tutankhamun.
Okay.
Found in the 90s. I think it's it's quite in the past. Yeah, but we consider it recent.
Recent, yeah. In comparison to the rest.
To the rest.
Yes.
Yeah. So this period saw these pharaohs, and also we had Ramses II. Do you know Ramses II is the one who was having trouble with Moses?
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ramses. During this time, Egypt became a global power, establishing diplomatic relations with the Kingdom of Nubia, the Levant, and Mesopotamia. The building of temples such as the Temple of Karnak and the Valley of the Kings showcased Egypt's artistic and religious grandeur. You know? This history is very deep, and I'm going to touch on this last part that I consider very, very relatable to we as black people. The role of Nubia, which is ancient Egypt and ancient Africa in the Nile civilization. How did Africans contribute to the establishment of the Nile civilization? We are still going further, brother.
Okay.
Do you have anything to say?
No, let's first go deeper.
Okay. While Egypt often dominated the historical narrative, it is essential to recognize the critical role that Nubia, directly to the south of Egypt, played in the Nile civilization. Nubia, known as the land of Kush, was home to several ancient kingdoms that interacted extensively with Egypt. The Nubians contributed significantly to the cultural, military, and political development of Egypt. One of the most notable historical events is the 25th dynasty, when the Nubian kings, known as the Kushite dynasty, ruled Egypt. Pharaoh Piye, the first ruler of this dynasty, successfully unified Egypt and led a renaissance of Egyptian cultures, emphasizing its African roots. The Nubians also brought forward advancement in military strategy and building techniques. This reciprocal relationship between Nubia and Egypt shaped the development of African civilization as a whole. It emphasized the interconnectedness of African society along the River Nile. African people from both regions were involved in complex trade networks, and their contribution to literature, art, and scientific knowledge which were immeasurable. This heritage remains an important aspect of African identity and pride in establishment and development of the Nile Valley civilization. Now, what is the legacy of the Nile Valley civilization for Black Americans and Black people and Africans in the motherland? For Black people in Africa and the African diaspora, the Nile civilization represents a profound connection to the history and culture of the African continent. During the transatlantic slave trade, millions of Africans were forcibly taken to the Americas. I don't know how many times I've said this. Okay. They were taken to the Americas, of course, during the slave trade, Now, the legacy of Egypt and the broader Nile civilization did not disappear. Over time, African Americans as well as Black people across the Caribbean and Latin America sought to reclaim their heritage, and the history of Egypt became a symbol of resistance and pride. The study of ancient Egypt has been a central pillar in the African-centered consciousness movements, notably during the Harlem Renaissance, the Pan-African movement, and the rise of Black nationalism in the 20th century. Black leaders such as Marcus Garvey, Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, emphasized Egypt as a symbol of Africa's greatness, urging Black people to reconnect with their roots. The Nile civilization became a beacon for the reclamation of Black identity, pride, and history in the face of the oppressive forces of colonialism, slavery, and racism. The intellectual and cultural contribution of the Nile civilization continues to be an essential part of Black history. From the spirituals of enslaved Africans in the Americas, which often carried themes of hope and liberation, reminiscent of ancient Egypt myths, to the modern movements for civil rights and liberation. The legacy of the Nile civilization is still alive up to date. That was very deep. And now I think we have to conclude.
Yes.
The civilization which happened during the Nile civilization, the civilization which happened during the time of Nile civilization. I think it's right. Now, this civilization developed along the banks of the river Nile, which was an enduring testament to the greatness of African people. It laid the groundwork for monumental achievement in every field imaginable: arts, science, architecture, and governance. It remains a source of pride for the black people of Africa and the African diaspora. For African Americans, the legacy of the Nile civilization is a reminder that their ancestral heritage is rich, complex, and foundational to the development of human civilization. As the world continues to grapple with issues of race, identity, and heritage, understanding the contribution of the Nile civilization allows black people to reconnect with their African roots and continue to honor the greatness of their ancestors. The black experience, both in America and in Africa, is deeply intertwined, you understand, with the ancient civilizations of the Nile. And this shared heritage continues to inspire generations across the world where we can find black people.
Amen. It feels like a preaching, man. I think...
you think so? You think it was preached?
It's very powerful.
Okay.
And maybe my plea to black people, honestly, is, you know, the truth is human beings find pride in achievement.
Yeah.
There's a sense of pride when you achieve something.
Yeah.
And when shall we black people ever wake up to the truth, to rise and challenge the current narrative that has hidden who we are, and go back to find out who we are?
Yeah.
And by doing so, we will find so much information, so much achievement that we can be proud of. Look at how much history we have. But you can imagine how little we know as black people about our own history.
I think it's because we didn't own the pen and the paper.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's time, because it's never late to do a good thing.
No.
This is the time now. This awakening.
Yeah.
We need to continuously preach. And you cannot overdo a good thing. We need to continuously preach, if I can use the term, without tiring, to tell black people to wake up, to now own the paper and the pen, to rewrite history.
Their history.
Yes.
Yeah. That one looks like the message of Wodemaya. Telling African stories the African way.
Yes, sure.
Yes. So guys, this is my boy Simon. Check out Simon on his channel, AfriSight.
Is the channel?
Yeah. Make sure to subscribe. Let's get him to 1,000 subscribers. Yeah. And guys, remember to stay black, stay positive.
And love yourselves, black people.
Love yourself. See you in the next one.
Peace.
Peace.